Welcome everyone to 52 Weeks of Leadership. I'm Paul Teslick, Dean of the School of Management. Thanks for being here with us today. This is February 1st, so this marks, I think it's week 5 of 52 Weeks of Leadership. And I'm really thrilled to be able to have joining us John Scannell, who is the CEO of Moog. This series, of course, this is the first one that you've tuned into, is all about the latest concepts around leadership and thought leaders, practicing leaders, sharing their wisdom and their ideas about what leadership is all about in short, succinct half-hour segments that we're doing every week. And again, today we have the privilege of having a highly accomplished CEO, John Scannell, who's the CEO of Moog. John has a long and distinguished career at Moog. He started as an engineer in their operations in Ireland, and then had a variety of different assignments across the organization in a variety of different roles. And in 2011 became the CEO of Moog, and then a few years after that was named the chairman of the board of Moog. So John has, again, kind of really accomplished set of leadership accomplishments to his credit. And we're fortunate to be able to have John here today on this topic of leading through a crisis, because whether you're a CEO or whether you have no direct reports at all, the challenges around the pandemic and everything else that we've been going through together over the past year, of course, are notable. And getting insight from a CEO perspective has lessons for us all in important aspects of leadership. So John, we're very pleased to have you here today, and welcome to 52 Weeks of Leadership. Maybe as a starting point, people here in Buffalo and Western New York certainly know about Moog, but we have people from across the globe participating. So maybe you could share a little bit of background about Moog and what you do there.
First of all, thank you very much indeed for the invitation, Paul. My pleasure to be here. So Moog is a company based here in Buffalo, New York, just outside Buffalo. It was founded in 1951 by Bill Moog. Sometimes folks who are a little bit older think about the synthesizers, which was a musical instrument that was developed. There was a Moog brand name. It turns out we've no connection actually to that company. We're about a $3 billion company, about 13,000 people worldwide. We're in 26 different countries, and about half of our people are outside the US. And what we do is we focus on very high-end motion and fluid controlled solutions for very difficult problems. So just a couple of quick examples. In 1969, when Apollo 11 brought men to the moon, Moog did the steering controls on all 3 stages of that rocket. And when I think about it today, if you fly on a commercial airplane and you look out the window and you see the surfaces move on the wings, that's the type of actuation Moog actuation controls those surfaces. And we are in a variety of different markets, from defense to commercial aircraft to industrial. Wide variety, very advanced technology, headquartered here in East Aurora, New York.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that background. So we're going to do things a little bit differently today, which is more of a Q&A format. And so maybe as a first question, in terms of providing a little bit of context, could you speak a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted business at Moog?
Well, we've been pretty lucky, Paul, in that it definitely has had an impact on us, but because of the nature of our business and diverse end markets, we've actually done reasonably well. So the technology, we have a clear technology focus, as I described, high-end motion and fluid control, but we bring that to different markets. So if I walk through the 5 major markets and talk about how they've done, that will perhaps give you the best sense of it. Our biggest market is defense. Most of that is US defense. That's about 40% of our business. And then another 10% of our business is in space, which is also a lot of defense-related work. So half of our business is defense and space, and that's done very well over the last year. There's actually been additional spending, and our business has grown in both of those. But 10% of our business is in medical markets. We make a variety of products that are used for ventilation equipment and also for pumps, intravenous and enteral feeding pumps. And that business has also been up as a response to demand for pandemic-related equipment. Then we have an industrial business, about 20%. That's been down 10 to 20%. Part of that was a recession that was coming on in Europe and the US. Part of it is the pandemic. And finally, commercial aircraft, where we sell products to Boeing and Airbus. That has been particularly hard hit, and that's down over 50% over the last 9 months. So overall, 20% of our business highly impacted, 20% of our business in a bit of a slowdown, but then 60% of our business has done pretty well. So overall, we've been lucky and we've done pretty well under the circumstances.
So it sounds like, and I suspect many others can relate to this, parts of the business have fared better than other parts, but in aggregate, you've been able to adapt to the realities of the pandemic well.
Yeah, and I think diversity is a wonderful thing. If you're an investor, typically investors prefer to diversify themselves and they like pure plays in business. But if you're running a business, diversity across end markets is a wonderful thing, so that you can ride the waves up and down in the different markets.
Yeah, yeah. So to shift gears to talk about the topic of leadership, certainly this past year has been a challenge on many levels, and certainly it's made us, I think there's a whole bunch of insights, right, that we've kind of learned during the pandemic. But specific to leadership, as you reflect on what you've seen both at Moog, but also around you as a CEO, how is leading during the times that we've been going through, during challenging times, how is that similar to or different from what leadership is like during more quote unquote normal times?
Yeah, I think the difference perhaps in when you have a situation like what we've had, which started out as a crisis and has turned into a chronic situation. I mean, in the start, I think we all thought, well, we're going.
Oh, John, I think you just went on mute.
Sorry, I'm not sure how I went. Can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. What I was saying was, I think when you hit a crisis in a business, you change, the speed of response has to change. And COVID started out as a crisis and it turned into a chronic problem because we're 9 months into it and we're probably another, pick your time, 6, 9 months more perhaps before we'll start to get back to some level of normality. And I think when you hit a crisis, it's speed. You got to set priorities and you got to move very quickly. And the story I'll tell you is how that happened for us. I was on an airplane. I flew back from Chicago. It was my last business trip on the 13th, Friday, the 13th of March last year. And as I'm flying back, the conference I went to, they said quite a few people didn't turn up because of the pandemic. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of odd. I mean, it just wasn't that big a deal at the time. And as I'm waiting in Buffalo to get my luggage off the airplane, the guy standing beside me in the line is talking to somebody who's saying, oh yeah, we're not traveling anymore. And so you just started to hear this stuff. And I guess I realized, boy, it's really changing. And so we had some management meetings, calls over the weekend. And Monday morning, we had an emergency meeting. And Tuesday, we did a call with 400 plus managers around the world. And we said, we're shutting down by Friday. By Friday, everybody has to go and work from home that can. And we're going to try and keep the factories going. So we set 2 clear priorities. First and foremost was the health and safety of our employees. And second was to try and keep the business going and service our customers and thereby ensure the financial health of our employees as well. And then after that, we moved very quickly. And what was amazing for me was if we as a company had decided we're going to try and send more than half our workforce home and see if that works, we would have probably taken 3 years. We'd have done pilots, we'd have done reviews, we'd have done discussions, and eventually we might have got it. And instead of that, we did it in 3 days and it worked, not without challenges. So to me, it's clear priority setting, and then you got to respond very quickly if you hit a crisis.
Yeah, that's great. So priority setting, it sounds also being open to and encouraging innovation also, as you were pointing out. I mean, we certainly have had experiences. We had to move all of our teaching from the vast majority of it being face-to-face to 100% online in a single week. That would have taken us years to be able to do. Certainly not ideal circumstances, but can appreciate what you're saying. So as you reflect on kind of the experience at Moog during this pandemic, expanding on what you were just talking about, are there particular leadership principles that stand out to you as particularly important?
I think that first of all, I think leadership is a team experience, as a team sport. I think perhaps folks tend to feel like the leader makes all the decisions and everybody follows, but I don't think that's the way it actually works. And so at the CEO level, at the executive level in Moog, we set some priorities and we said we got to all try to work from home. We did a lot of communication. And after that, it was really leadership down through the organization that made all of the local decisions to actually, how do I do that? Because every country was different, every county in the US was different, local rules were different, various places were shutting down. So what happened was it was really about setting direction and then hoping that the people that are on the front line will actually make all the right decisions. And we often talk in leadership about avoiding micromanaging, but in a situation like this, where in 3 days, half your staff are going home, there is no micromanaging. And so you have to have that culture of trust and leadership down through the organization to make it happen. And the person at the top makes actually very little decision, very few decisions, if any, I mean, apart from setting priorities and communicating. And so that to me was how little further up you actually impacted and how much leadership really happens at the forefront, where people are making the decisions facility by facility, group by group, shift by shift.
So what you're describing and what I'm hearing is around really kind of shared distributed leadership, it sounds like, and so important, particularly during a time when you have to rapidly mobilize and make a whole set of decisions that you probably weren't even planning for or anticipating.
Yeah. So I don't think you can't change your leadership style, or you can't create a culture where people are willing to follow when you hit a crisis. And so much of what we managed to do at Moog, like I'm sure many other companies and organizations around the world, is you rely on what you've built up over decades in terms of the culture, the way people respond, their ability to make decisions locally. And then you just call on it when it's the leadership. I guess it's like a play in football, when the actual play happens after they snap the ball, the quarterback is making those decisions and he can't reflect on it. But it's years of coaching and training and a culture around what everybody else is going to do, knowing where people are going to be. That's how it works effectively.
Yeah. So when you're saying that, I'm reminded by the famous saying, I think it was by Peter Drucker, who said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I mean, I think what you're saying is that particularly in more, we will get on the other side of this pandemic. And maybe if there's kind of a lesson learned from it, it's around really prioritizing the importance of building that strong culture and a culture of shared leadership, where you're kind of building the leadership bench strength up and down across the organization, because you can't anticipate when the next crisis or emergency or whether it's small or large, is going to happen. And that's when you really call upon the attributes of the culture to be able to carry you through it.
Yeah, I actually think, leadership is all about dependency. It's all about dependency on those that you hope are going to follow. When I do internal meetings, I ask folks sometimes, what's the difference between a manager and a leader? And of course, I have my answer already. I'm not sure if this is the academic, I'm sure it's not the academic answer, but to me, a leader, a manager is somebody, I can give somebody a management position in an office and a title and an org chart, but I say, I can't make you a leader. And the only person that's going to make you a leader is your followers. And I think if you have a culture of trust where people align with the vision, they trust the leadership that we're doing the right thing, there's open, honest communications, then folks will follow. And so the leader can lead, but if the folks aren't willing to follow, then you're not going to get very far. And so leadership is all about dependency, and you got to build those relationships over a long period of time, that folks up and down the organization are willing to follow all levels of leaders. It's not just the person in the corner office, it's everybody up and down through the organization.
Well, you made an important comment earlier and just tied it back in about the importance of trust. And that certainly is something that I think kind of speaks to that distinction between kind of what a manager has to focus on and what a leader needs to focus on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important point. So again, reflecting on what's gone on over the last 10 months, year or so for everyone, including leaders, is there something that, I don't know, has maybe surprised you or given you some new or enhanced insight about leadership that maybe you didn't necessarily think about before?
Well, as I mentioned, Paul, you know, the speed of response was a real demonstration of what you can do if you have a crisis and everybody's on the same page. I think after that, it reinforced to me, I guess, the importance of personal contact and actually taking the time and talking to folks and having a social interaction as part of the overall business and actually being genuinely interested in what folks are doing. And so talking to folks when there's not a business, it's not, you know, calling somebody and saying, so how is it going down there? How is that leadership going? How is your site doing? And by the way, how are you doing? And how's your family doing? I think that goes an enormous way in terms of building that sense that folks genuinely feel there's interest up and down the organization about what's happening. And while I might have said that was always important, I think in a situation where people are under significant stress, it's all the more important to take the time to recognize each other, recognize the challenges that we're all going through, and spend a little bit of time just making sure you're caring for the folks and the individuals involved. And not just the business. The business, of course, is important, but folks know that. And what we might tend to do is put the personal to one side, because, of course, as leaders, we're supposed to be strong and independent and all those things. And that's not the case. Everybody is struggling with the same concerns about parents and children and their own health and their future and all these things. So that's been I guess it reinforced for me just how important that is and how much of a difference it makes for individuals and folks when somebody takes the time to actually ask how they're doing, not just the business.
Yeah. So, and along with that is listening, expressing empathy, trying to understand and be curious about how you can be able to help and understand the circumstances that people are going through. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So certainly front and center in what we've been experiencing, of course, has been the pandemic, but 2020 was a year in so many other ways as well. Of course, we had the horrible and the tragic events that really raised our collective consciousness around addressing the challenges of racial injustice, political turmoil and division, among others. What are some of your thoughts about how to address these types of challenges from the standpoint of leadership? You know, what are some of the ways in which kind of leaders need to maybe lead differently in the wake of some of these more kind of social and societal level types of issues that we've faced and probably will continue to experience in different ways?
I think part of the question is, so what's business's role in these types of activities or events? I've always said internally, I believe politics is personal. I believe that folks should decide for themselves what their political views are. And I believe debate and discussion is a very healthy thing. But the fundamentals around respect for each other, nonviolence, working together, listening to the other person, being willing to adjust and change your mind, I think all of that is also really important. And of course, some of the things that we've seen have highlighted injustices and perhaps intolerance and various other traits that I think most of us feel are not appropriate. And so I think what's important in business is that we always maintain a proper sense of ethics. And within our own four walls, we make sure that we're trying to do the types of things that are just and fair and lead by example in that. And what has happened, I would say, as you say, Paul, is there's been perhaps a little bit of an awakening or a realization of stuff that was always there. And but for me personally, I can use the example. One of the things that we try to do at Moog, one of our phrases is we want to make Moog a great place to work. We want Moog to be the best place that you've ever worked, through the combination of the culture, the type of work you're doing, the way we work, the opportunities, etc. And so I that had been my experience with the company, and I thought, well, that's the culture that we built, and that's what we're doing, and it's the same for everybody. And through the George Floyd death, the tragic death of George Floyd, and the follow-up activities, that opened our eyes, or perhaps forced us to think again, well, is that the way it is? Is that the way it is in our company? Is that, and so that triggered much more focus around diversity, equity, inclusion. It got us to kick off a process. For me personally, it was a journey because somewhere along the way, I learned about a book called White Fragility. It's a book, actually, I have a copy of it here, which I read, and it was a complete eye opener for me. Now, I'm Irish, so I'm not a native U.S. citizen. I'm a U.S. citizen now, obviously, and so I'm also in one sense a minority. But I had no idea of the challenge that some of the minorities, particularly people of color in the U.S., face because of the entire system. And the book helped me understand the idea of white supremacy as being not an individual, but more a system that systematically favors people like me, because if you start off ahead, you have all of the opportunities that go with it. And out of that, we decided that we would do employee listening sessions for our Black employees. That's where we started. And there was a lot of feedback that came from that was very bothering and upsetting, because it was not the company that I thought we had. And so more recently, I said, well, I want to hear directly from these folks. I want to listen so I can hear what their experience is like. And that was, as I say, Paul, that was a real disappointment, because it was not the company I thought we had. Now, every company has challenges. We're not perfect, but the culture in terms of if you're a Black employee, you experience it different than if you're a white employee. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not acceptable. And so that's triggered a whole set of activities, and it's going to take us time, and it's not something you're going to change overnight. But I think it was a realization and an eye-opening and a listening and an understanding and a sense of shame. Well, why is it like that? It shouldn't have been like that. And why is it that I didn't know, that others didn't know, that we didn't hear, that we didn't take the time to listen? So that to me was, as much a personal journey and hopefully a journey for the company. And it's not that we're going to change our values or our culture. It's that we're actually going to try and live them for everybody by understanding perhaps where we're not living up to them. But there's no change in terms of respect and opportunity for all, and hopefully a great place to work, and open communication and feeling safe and feeling engaged. But the reality was not everybody gets the same experience. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. And that I'm also looking at kind of on the chat, and people are also putting an exclamation point by your endorsement of the book. I mean, clearly what I'm hearing, and as you're describing what you've done at Moog, is you, instead of maybe waiting for the moment to pass or to maybe kind of turn a different direction, you've really kind of very much leaned into this, and starting with being more aware, understanding, inquisitive, and asking questions, and being willing to be uncomfortable in that process, because you to come to terms with some of these things, like you said, that for many of us, we haven't had that experience. I can say that certainly as a kind of a white male growing up here, I've certainly had a whole different set of life experiences than many others, and we're all shaped by those. So I think what you're saying sounds like really important advice. Would you agree with this, John? I'm kind of curious, just as kind of a follow-up question. As I see, in kind of the outside of business, but from the standpoint of having an opportunity to see how CEOs across a wide range of industries have responded to these social issues that have really been front and center over the last year, I feel like I've seen a much greater willingness of CEOs and other leaders, but CEOs in particular, to speak out and kind of bring attention to these types of issues than maybe was as was the case in the past. Would you agree with that?
I think that's clearly happened, Paul. I think the big tech guys, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, or they're faced with decisions that they have to make themselves, which automatically engage them in the political arena. And I think CEOs in general are much more outspoken about some of these things. I think it's a very difficult line to walk properly, to make sure that our job primarily as CEOs is to run businesses, but run them in a way that they support ethical, fair opportunities for everybody. But politics is also its own business, and I don't believe that businesses should try to meddle in politics too much, and to some extent at all. We don't have a PAC. But I think certain businesses do, and they get involved in politics. As I said, I think politics is personal, that people should vote for who they, the policies or the types of programs that they think are important. But it has to be within the context that it's still open, honest debate, trust, integrity, fairness, and differences in policy should not turn into some type of violent intolerance. I think that's not acceptable, in society, hopefully, and it's definitely within a company. We got to also be able to debate and have differences of opinion, but do it with respect for each other. But I think, Paul, it's a fine line between politics and business, because I was not voted in by anybody. I happen to have the job I have because I got voted by the board of directors, but my job is not to opine and to try and influence public opinion, I think, or the opinion of our employees on stuff that I think that they hear a lot of different opinions on, except in the context of, this is the type of company we run, this is what we expect, this is how we want to behave with each other. And that, I think, is important, that we continue to reiterate that what's important for us and for our company and for the folks who work with us.
Great. Thank you. So, and I can also see on the chat, there's a lot of interest in this topic, particularly around diversity and equity and inclusion. And maybe we can circle back in the kind of the bonus time after 12:30, if you're able to stay with us.
Sure.
But I do have one more kind of a final quick question, and it's again back to the topic of dealing with challenges, but a little bit more kind of direct to you as a CEO. I can imagine that being a CEO can be a pretty lonely experience in some ways, because of the things that you have responsibility for, and then you add on to that the responsibilities that are associated with leading during a pandemic and a crisis. How do you find dealing with those burdens and those responsibilities of leadership, and how do you personally manage them? Be interested in how you've been able to weather this, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it is true that that the job as a CEO can be lonely, because while you make very few decisions, actually one of my mantras is that the fewer decisions you make as CEO, probably the better you're doing, because decisions should really be made by those folks that know what's actually going on in the business. But you do take responsibility, and that's, in the end, that's you take the final responsibility. But I'm very lucky, because I have a very supportive board. So we've kept them informed. They've been supportive of the things that we're doing, and they're all business folks, so they understand the challenges. I have a wonderful team of senior leaders who know their business inside and out, and we're all on the same page in terms of priorities: employees first, business second. And then right down through the organization, there are folks who have been, who are supportive of what we're doing, and we're all kind of rowing in the same direction. There's peer groups that I, participate in. There's been lots of calls. And of course, when you do a peer discussion with CEOs, we all finally admit that none of us actually knows exactly what we're doing. We're all making it up as we're going along. We make mistakes. You do the best you possibly can, and everybody's struggling with the same challenges. But so that makes you feel like, okay, there's nothing, I got the same challenges that the other folks have. And then finally, of course, you've got family. I have a wife and I have 2 grown children at this stage, and family are very, very important in all of this. And so I think there's all those mechanisms there that help. And because we're all going through the same challenges, I think that also is important to remember. So it's different if I have a particular challenge with my company, but it's very different for everybody else. Right now, we're all struggling with the same challenge, and so that sense of community is there. And so that's really been the mechanism that has helped me through it.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So I'm hearing rely on your support system. Your point that you started on is that leadership is really a kind of a team sport. Those are things that really, it sounds like as a CEO that you've relied on. So I'm noticing our time is right at 12:30. And so this is kind of the formal conclusion to our program. Again, we like to be able to keep the 52 weeks as a half-hour segment. And know that people need to go on to their probably next Zoom meeting, right? Or whatever that is. But thank you so much, John. This has been a real pleasure to have you. If you are able to stay on for a little longer, what we can do is then kind of shift over and kind of open things up for questions if people want to put their questions into the chat. But before we segue into doing that, I'll give you an actual applause, and hopefully everybody else will chime in virtually. This is always, to me, the part that you just cannot replicate over technology is kind of the applause when you have 150 people who have just been listening to an outstanding speaker. So thank you, John, though. It was great having you participate. And we're really thankful for having you on today. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul. My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So for those of you who are able to stay on for a little bit longer, and if you do have a question for John, what I'd encourage you to do is to post your question onto the chat on Zoom, and I'll do my best to kind of moderate some of that discussion for at least a few more minutes, as long as John can be able to stay with us. So a couple comments or questions that were posed in the chat, John, that kind of circle back to a couple topics that we talked about. First, in talking about responding to the challenge that the pandemic faced over the past, I guess we're now into 11 months at this point, you made, I thought, an important distinction between responding at first in the crisis mode and then responding into the long-term chronic mode, which of course has been obviously it's very different from where we were pre-pandemic, but you made an important point that it's different from what that initial response was over the first few weeks or months of the crisis mode. And you talked about prioritizing as critical in a crisis mode. What do you see as important observations about leadership in shifting to that more long-term chronic mode?
Yeah, so we stick, the priorities have not changed. And actually every call that I have with employees, every communication we send out, it's always starts with, we've got two priorities. First and foremost, the health and safety of our employees and their families. And second, the ongoing health of the business. And we repeat those again and again. So that hasn't changed. What has happened, Paul, is that we've had we set up a team, what we call a global response team. I think lots of companies did this. I'm guessing UB did as well, where we took folks from around the business, 8 or 10 folks, and they get together regularly. And they spend a lot of time thinking about all the latest evolution. So the vaccine has come. Will we be able to get the vaccine? Answering that question. Providing education about the vaccine, so we're constantly communicating and adapting, recognizing that the situation is all the time changing. If we go back to March, we said we're going to try to send everybody home. Come June, July, it seemed like things were getting a lot better. We were past the first wave and we said, okay, well, looks like it's getting better. What we'd like to do is gradually, carefully bring folks back into work, observe distances and all that. But let's start to bring folks back in, because we are a company where we believe that social interaction is important. We get to October, the next wave is coming, and we say, oh, stop that. We got to get everybody back home again. And that's where we are right now, of course. And so I believe remaining flexible, adjusting to the information as it's coming in, again, giving local folks the ability to make the decision, because our operations in China have been running as normal for the last 6 or 9 months, whereas our operations in parts of the US or in Europe are in a completely different state. Looking for opportunities to try and encourage folks, and give them some kind of a break. So we've taken some extra days off. We had obviously New Year's Day off and a couple of days over Christmas, but the next formal vacation day that we have in the States, or holiday, is not until Easter. So that's 3 months away. So we've decided middle of February, we're going to take a Monday off. We're just going to give everybody a long weekend and say, take a mental health day or take a day off. Unfortunately, there's not much for folks to do right now. It's a really difficult thing. but we said, let's, just take a day and let's, try to recuperate. We've also gone around and around on things like, for instance, if somebody in my department has COVID, and now we say, well, you have COVID, so yes, obviously you need to isolate, but we think just to be safe, we should send the 3 people that are relatively close around you also home. Well, do you pay for that or not? Do you pay people through an absence that these are people that couldn't work from home that are perhaps in production? And we've determined that, yes, if we ask you to go home, we will pay you for as long as you have to be at home. Early on, we said, folks may be just nervous. And so we put in place a process for the first couple of months where we said, well, if you just feel you can't come to work, we will still pay you. Now, after a while, we had to say, well, we can't continue to do that indefinitely. We need people. We think it's as safe as it can be. We need people to come in if you're running machines, because that's keeping the company going. And so we had to adjust that policy. So I think it's a lot of adjustments week on week, constant communication. We've sent out endless communications to our employees, videos, leadership videos, interactions. I think that's the key. It's communication and adaptability, perhaps, Paul.
Excellent. I mean, I think those are important lessons, and I can certainly see that in our business in higher education, to kind of map on very much to just what you were saying. So again, I'm kind of looking at some of the questions that are popping up on the chat, and some really interesting ones. Here's one that interested in how you've seen this work at Moog. You, of course, have a lot of diversity at Moog across the workforce, and I'm sure that one of those dimensions on diversity is around age and kind of tenure in the organization. How have you kind of, and maybe this has nothing to do directly with the bearing on the pandemic or leading during a crisis, but just in terms of managing kind of generational differences at Moog, like many organizations, I would imagine what you have seen is that the average age of certain segments of your workforce and your managers, maybe in particular, is going up and up as kind of that generational segment kind of moves along. How have you kind of managed some of those differences across generations in the workforce at Moog?
Well, succession planning is something that we've really tried to instill in a much more formalized way over the last 5 to 10 years, Paul, where we have processes every year where at all levels folks are trying to do this. So if I won the lottery, I got promoted, I moved on, who are the successors for my role, and who are the successors for all of the roles within the organization? And I think over time, when you do that first, there's gaps, but the exercise of doing it year on year on year starts to help in terms of thinking ahead and thinking about what might happen, and trying to be prepared. Now, of course, when somebody suddenly leaves, it's always a little bit of well, what are we going to do now? But the more of that succession planning that you do, and we couple that with talent development and performance reviews and all these types of things, structuring those HR policies in a way that hopefully we're dealing with as much of that as you can. But I do tell managers, of every manager I ever talk to when I talk to young people, I say the first thing you should do from the day you start in a new job is look for your successor. Always. Because what it does is it allows you to move on when the time comes, versus what some folks feel like is if they're indispensable in the job, then they're guaranteed a job for life. And for me, what happens is then you can't move on. And so if you've got successors, it's really easy to move on to the next opportunity. And that's been from the day I became CEO 10 years ago, I've been looking for the next person.
Yeah, very good. So kind of another kind of question I'm kind of seeing come across, and this is kind of an interesting one. Certainly another kind of topic that has gotten a lot of interest, especially we're kind of seeing this with kind of change in administration and around focus around climate change and around sustainability. How has Moog approached this question of environmental sustainability, and how has that been incorporated into your practices and your business strategies?
So it's become more and more of a topic, Paul, I would say, over the last few years. It depends, of course, what part of the world you're in as well. If certain of our facilities, for instance, in Europe, are far more advanced in their thinking, and actually having lived in Europe, obviously grown up there as well, it's a different view than in the US. I'll give you a simple story. I was waiting at a train station. It was a subway train station. I was outside in Germany for my wife in the car. This was back in the mid-90s. And it was probably about 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It was freezing. And so I had the engine running. And the guy behind me came up to me and he explained to me, you got to turn that engine off because you're polluting the atmosphere. And he was not joking. And if I didn't want to do it, he would have called the police to make sure I did conform. And this is now 25 years ago. So, and obviously in different US, that's not something that somebody would think about nowadays. As we are investing more in new facilities and new operations, we're looking much more at sustainability in terms of solar panels and also spending extra money going beyond what's actually required to try and become more sustainable. The most exciting thing, though, for us is because of the types of capabilities and technologies we have, we're starting to spend more and more time looking at the opportunities in unstructured environments for electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles. And so we actually see opportunities because of the range of products and technologies that we have, that we might be able to play a role in that emerging area. And that to me is exciting because it addresses climate change, it addresses efficiency and productivity. And of course, it's also then a really interesting business opportunity. So I think going forward, I hope that we will be able to contribute a lot more on that front. But it's one of those topics, Paul, like DE&I and stuff that continue to come up and you try to continue to evolve over time. And as you look back, you wonder, well, why didn't I do that before? But it's something that it's important, but investors don't necessarily, they'll all tell you it's important, but they don't want to pay you to do it either. So you've got to kind of move at the pace that the public markets allow because we're a public company.
Sure, I'm sure there's a lot of nuances there that you need to be able to navigate as CEO in terms of moving the sustainability agenda forward. And as a dean of a business school, of course, we're interested in educating and developing the leaders of the future. I'm interested in what advice, what wisdom, perspective you could be able to share that we can be able to take forward to our future business leaders when we have them as students.
Well, I give you, so I went to business school 20 plus years ago, and it was all case method, and we did however many cases over the course of the 2 years, 12 or 13 or 1400, and covered everything from finance to operations to technology, innovation, everything, as you do, Paul, in your programs. And at the end of it, I came away with just one conclusion, which was business is all about people. And so I think reminding folks that in the end, leadership is about people, innovation is about people, operations is about people. Yes, there's lots of theories and there's lots of supporting advice and there's lots of structures and there's lots of things that you should know about. But in the end, it's people. People are by far your most valuable asset. People are the ones that do the innovation. People are the ones that sell to the customers. People are the ones that develop the strategy. And if you can create an environment and a culture where people feel like they can be their best selves and bring everything to work. And I'm not by any means claiming that we at Moog are perfect in this in any way, but that's the key. It's all about the people. I think maybe if you're trading options on a screen in Wall Street, that's not the case. There are some purely technical things, but the importance of people is really, really, I think, is the most important thing in business.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a great point because it ties together so many different things that you've just been sharing with us during this session, and that might be a great point for us to end on. I think we had close to 150 people, and we still have over 100 who have been staying on to hear the further Q&A, and I'm sure we could be able to kind of go on for quite a lot longer, but I do want to bring this to a close, and thank you again, John. This has been a great session, and we appreciate you making the time and sharing your perspective with us. Clearly, kind of when we talk about putting people first, leading with empathy and humility, being authentic, you embody those attributes as a leader, and we're really grateful to have you as part of this series. So thank you again, John.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much indeed to your listeners as well.
Yeah, and for everyone else, so we continue with this series. So the next one will be on February 8th, where we'll have Dr. Charles Lindsay, one of our faculty members, who is going to be talking about leading through analytics. And then the week after that, just to give a little advanced preview, is February 15th, where we'll be talking on this topic of achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion with Maura Bellevue, who's the director of UB Center for Diversity Innovation. So hoping that people can continue to stay with the series and join us on those future sessions. So thanks everyone. And thanks also especially to Molly Anderson and Peter, our awesome GA, who's been kind of managing behind the scenes with everything, and look forward to seeing everyone next week and beyond. Take care.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, John.